There's a tweet. Chip.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and proud Tampa Catholic graduate, the one and only Eric Henry of Horns247.com. Eric, it is full disclosure, well, for live, so but for those who are going to listen to this in podcast form, it is February 12th, Wednesday, February 12th. And hope everyone's having a good Valentine's Day week. Valentine's Day, nothing but stress for the fellas. Nowhere to go but down. So, fellas, just take care of your business on this one. Hopefully you have a gal who maybe sees Valentine's Day for the corporate boondoggle that it is. But anyway, we love around here. We also love talking Texas football, basketball, softball, baseball. We had a lot going on here, Eric. We got a lot to tackle here in this episode. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing all right, Chip Brown. I'm running off of about 5-6 hours sleep, which is enough. That's enough. Closed up shop around 2 a.m. last night after a eventful night at Moody Center, one that didn't see Texas come out on the winning side of things. But all in all, I cannot complain. And Chip, I am with you. And maybe that's just us as men, but any day can be Valentine's Day, right? It doesn't have to be this corporate deal that's February, whatever. Just any day that I show up and I put in the effort to be a excellent partner is Valentine's Day, right? I'm with you, Chip. I don't know if our 1% female audience is going to disagree, but I'm with you, Chip.
Yeah, it's a trap. No, I'm kidding. All right. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Eric, like I said, we got a lot to get into. Let's touch on football first before we move on to Texas men's and women's basketball, a little softball, and of course, Texas baseball opening its season on Valentine's Day in Arlington at Globe Life Field. I'll actually be there for that one. But let's touch on football first. A housekeeping matter. Texas is moving the Sam Houston State non-conference game from September 27th to September 20th. I don't know that we have deep thoughts about this, but it will give Texas an off week, in probably a little bit more of an advantageous spot. Instead of having an off week after 3 games, you're going to have an off week after 4 games, and right before you go play back-to-back on the road at Florida on October 4th. And of course, actually, you're going to play 4 games away from home in a row. This is that quirk in the Texas schedule, because the Oklahoma game is considered a home game for Texas, even though it's played in Dallas. So Texas will get an off week right before they go to Florida, to Dallas for the OU game, to Kentucky on October 18th, and to Starkville, Mississippi for the Mississippi State game. Eric, your thoughts?
Like you said, I don't think we're going to have too extended of thoughts there. I mean, certainly from a scheduling perspective, it's nice to have a bye week. I'm sure Steve Sarkisian, or bye week before you get into SEC play, I should say. I'm sure Steve Sarkisian is, in his football Rolodex of a mind there, he has done the math and seen what his team went through this year in the SEC and is prioritizing that bye heading into SEC play. Listen, anything is possible in football, right? Look no further than App State, Michigan. So, I'm not a believer in just summarily dismissing the G5. Sam Houston lost their coach, K.C. Keeler, longtime head coach there, went I'm forgetting where went to Temple. Phil Longo, former Wisconsin offensive coordinator, big air raid guy, is going to take over there at Sam Houston. So, listen, all in all, shouldn't be much of a test for the Horns. Don't think it'll be anything as far as on the field. It's really going to challenge them. Just know for me, it means that yours truly, Chip, doesn't get a chance. I was considering flying back to Florida to go check out the UCF Knights take on Bill Belichick in his, I shouldn't say opener because they're not in the same conference, but it'd be nice to see old Bill Belichick, in the college game. But that game is on September 20th. Work calls first, which means yours truly will be at the Mecca, Darrell K. Royal, Texas Memorial Stadium, Texas and Sam Houston State.
Yeah. So mark that on your calendars, Texas fans. You will have a game now on September 20th instead of September 27th against Sam Houston. Eric, we talked a little bit about the expectations for Arch Manning in our roundtable, which is a can't miss piece of content that we put out every Sunday over at Horns247.com. And the words realistic expectations as it pertains to Texas football are almost an oxymoron, but we were talking about what are realistic expectations for Arch Manning in his first season as the full-time starter for Texas. And I think one of the more curious, I think you and I both said he's going to throw for 3,500 yards. I said I expected him to throw for right at the same number of touchdowns that Quinn Ewers threw for last year. I think Quinn threw for 31. I said Arch would throw for 32. But I think the more intriguing question is what he's going to run for, because we know he's athletic. We know he can run. We know that Steve Sarkisian historically has not called designed quarterback runs because he's a pro style offense, doesn't want his quarterback to take unnecessary hits. But we also saw Arch Manning in a running package toward the end of the season in the red zone. And he had the 15-yard touchdown run against A&M. What do you think is realistic for him from a rushing perspective, Eric?
Chip, I'm going to answer the question, but I'll phrase it to you in the form of a question. If you have Michael Vick, if you have Vince Young, if you have insert your favorite dual threat of recent memory, right? And you choose to say, all right, we're not going to run. That's hustling backwards, correct? Like that's the opposite of what you do when you have someone that's trying to square peg round hole. I'm not saying that Steve Sarkisian is going to turn to all of a sudden the option offense and Arch is going to be running 30 times a game. Just making the point that, and you're not wrong because he said it. He's been upfront with us. He said it, publicly. I'm not looking to run my quarterback, a ton. Believes in pro style. Doesn't want his quarterback exposed to X amount of hits. I agree with that. I think that is excellent sentiment, and I think there's a strong measure of truth in that statement. However, it's the old, what's the Bob Knight line talking about Michael Jordan, right? Oh, we need a center. Draft Jordan, play him at center, right? He's that good. You don't not utilize your athlete's skill sets to the best of their ability. So I expect, Chip, and I can't wait to ask Steve about this next time we get an opportunity to talk to him. I expect there to be a little bit of a shift in terms of, hey, we're going to call it. Maybe it's 5 to 7 design runs, right? I expect there to be a shift. I say all that to say, when you ask me about what the expectations are for him as on the ground, I had him, like you said, over 3,500 passing yards, over 4,000 total yards. So I do think he will be, and I think I wrote this, that he'll have the most rushing yards of any quarterback since Vince Young at Texas, in my mind.
Yeah, or maybe Colt McCoy, who did lead the team in rushing in 2008. I was looking at Will Howard and Riley Leonard, the two quarterbacks who played in the national championship game. And, Will Howard had modest rushing totals. Riley Leonard had much more pronounced rushing totals. Howard, I think it was, 200 something yards. Riley Leonard, much more than that. I think Arch ends up around 300 yards. And a lot of it, I think, is going to be off script. It's going to be if things are breaking down and he can go get 5, 6, 10 yards. We saw him scramble for 21 yards against Georgia. So I think there will be a fair amount of those types of plays. And we've seen even in the NFL, the quarterbacks who have that ability to extend plays with their legs, to scramble with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar, Jaden Daniels, you've got that's such a weapon. I mean, I watched my Lions lose the NFC Championship game 2 years ago to Brock Purdy because of his legs. He was able to run around and extend or convert a couple third downs that helped, lead to points that put San Francisco ahead for good against the Lions. So, yeah, I think that I'm with you. I'm intrigued to see what Steve Sarkisian has to say about that. But I do think that we're going to see, like Quinn had minus 28 yards rushing because he doesn't look for that type of opportunity. And stupidly, as we've talked about, college takes the sack totals from the running total instead of the passing total, which makes no sense. In the NFL, they take the sack totals from the passing total. So I do think that we'll see Arch run for, a few hundred yards in that situation. Eric, our man Brad Crawford has come out with his way too early game by game predictions. Brad Crawford does a great job at 247 Sports. And he released this earlier this week, I'll say. And he's got Texas going 10-2 and with one loss in the SEC, 10-2, 7-1. He says the loss will be at one loss will be at Ohio State. The other loss will be at Georgia. And he says Texas is getting back to the SEC championship, and this time the Longhorns are going to end the 2025 season as league champions. He says Arch Manning projects as one of the statistically enhanced quarterbacks, but he's not going to get there until after the season opener at Ohio State. That's a brutal game for Texas against the defending national champs. From there, the Longhorns will win 8 straight to stay inside the top 4 before going to Athens in November for the first of potentially 2 games once again against Georgia. Your thoughts?
Man, I will be honest, I had not even given a real consideration to, a win-loss record next year. I guess, I toyed around with the thought process, and, I'm sort of believes Texas is going to make the college football playoff for the 3rd straight year. My gut reaction kind of aligns with Brad's because that's what I had Texas at last year. I had them losing to Georgia, and I think both of us picked Kentucky, right? Is that trap game? Yep. So I was along those lines. Chip, it's hard to go undefeated. That's why while I never saw Oregon as some, juggernaut that couldn't be beat. And of course, they don't play in the SEC. Let's take that for what it is. But the longer the college football season goes, it's hard to go undefeated. And you talk about some of the venues. I think, Chip, that's the thing to me. We talked about this when Texas's first SEC schedule was released this time last year. And you were like, man, what steak dinner does Texas owe the SEC, the league office, right? That they, got a cushy schedule, right? I would call it soft, call it cushy. Yeah, the schedule flips this year, right? So it's same opponents, just home road flips. But the venues, you got to go to the Swamp. While remains to be seen what Billy Napier is going to do with the Gators, as someone who's been to Florida Field many times, Ben Hill Griffin Stadium, it's going to be 103, 104,000 strong, right? You got to go to Sanford Stadium. I've been there before. That is a monster as well. You got to go to Ohio State. So to kind of wrap up the thought, like, again, I hadn't given too much consideration to a win-loss total right now, but just gut reaction, I can see that just because of the gauntlet, the grind of the SEC. You got to play OU. That's always going to be a game you got to get up for, regardless of whatever. You got to play A&M, right? So yeah, I just, visceral reaction. I would align with Brad.
Yeah. I think there's no steak dinners to the SEC for this schedule simply because of that stretch of 4 games away from home. Texas does not play a single game in the month of October in Austin. So they'll play Sam Houston on September 20th. And then the next time they will be at home is November 1st, because in the month of October, they're at Florida. They're in Dallas to play OU. They're at Kentucky, October 18th, and at Mississippi State, October 25th. That's just a lot. It's a lot to have to go on the road week after week after week. And it is, there's no bye week in that stretch of those 4 away games in the month of October. That's a grind. So, that they will get a bye, right? No, they won't actually. They'll get a bye after Vanderbilt. So they'll get a bye November 8th before they go play at Georgia. Difficult schedule from a scheduling standpoint. I mean, the games, as like you said, it's a flip of last year, and you got to go to Florida, you got to go to Georgia, you're going to go to Mississippi State, and you're going to go to Kentucky. But just the way the games are scheduled, I think, makes it a little tougher. And I do think that's why Texas asked Sam Houston State to move that game up to September 20th so that they'd get a bye after 4 games instead of after 3. The ideal is to get that bye after 4 games, and then after another 4 games. Texas now pretty close. It'll go 4, 5. They'll play 4 games, get a bye. Then they'll play 5 games, get a bye. And then they'll play their final 3 games. Their final 3 games at Georgia, home against Arkansas, home against A&M. All right, Eric.
Before you transition real quick, can you remember offhand? And I'm putting you on the spot, so I apologize. Can you remember offhand the last time in just your time covering Texas that they've been away from Austin for a month? While you're thinking of that, the reason I mention that is let's not summarily dismiss that. That's a grind. And the reason it comes to mind, Chip, is I remember the year before I joined Horns247, I covered a month's worth of games away from the team I was covering, their home stadium. One of those trips was going from Miami to Las Cruces, right? So that in itself is not an easy trip. But I'm just telling, even as someone who covers the team, you turn around, you travel somewhere, right? So you're traveling on Friday, you get back Sunday, whatever. You turn around, you're back on a flight Thursday-ish or Friday, depending on when you can get it. Covering those smaller leagues, it was usually a Thursday because it's harder to get into those destinations, right? It won't be the case here. But that's just us covering the team. I remember after that 4-game trip, Chip, I was wiped. So let's not just merely dismiss that. And that's just as covering the team. Imagine as players.
Yeah. It's a grind, and it's right there in the middle of the season. All right, Eric, let's move on because we've got a lot to get to. Let's talk a little basketball. Last night, the Texas men played host to number 2 Alabama, and Alabama dropped some hammers on the Longhorns at the Moody Center. It was a 23-point beatdown in Austin. So Auburn, came in here earlier in the year, and Texas kept that one close. They did not keep this one close, Eric. And the team is banged up. But I'll let you give us your thoughts on how, what happened here. And because, Alabama's the better team, but 23-point beat down at home, that's not good.
Yeah. And as our guy, Chris Bennett, appreciate you watching this morning. He asked 2 questions. One, Eric isn't broadcasting live from Moody Center. I am not. They let me out of Moody Center. I spent about 11 hours at Moody Center yesterday, coming from baseball availability straight over to Moody. Hey, Chip, it's a writer's paradise. It's quiet. It's free food. It's free Wi-Fi. It's better than try to post up at a Denny's or try to file, right? Which, I'm sure you've got a great story back in the day of trying to find some spot to file a story, right? It's better than that. It's cushy chairs. So
I'm just glad they let you in 5 hours before the game.
They did. I guess when you're a regular like us, they let you in. In relation to the game, and I'll address the game first and then kind of get to some of the side stories. I wasn't too surprised. I talked about this with you off air. Being there that early, I did get a chance to watch Texas go through their kind of pregame walkthrough, and then their warmups. And Arthur Kaluma wasn't right. And it's funny, Chip. Arthur Kaluma was the last take for Texas in the portal. They swung and missed on some bigger name guys, specifically bigs. Brandon Garrison, JT Toppin, went out and got guards. Arthur Kaluma was the last take. It's like, all right, we need another sizable guy who we're going to take. And that guy's proven to be the most valuable or one of the most valuable takes for Texas and the portal, the team's leading rebounder. But he just wasn't right. Second leading scorer. That knee caused him to only play 11 minutes. Devon Pryor was initially ruled probable on the availability report. Then it came out that he aggravated the calf somewhere between the probable and game time. Ended up being a game time decision. Devon didn't go through warmups, so wasn't dressed. Kendall Weaver, been out, continues to be out. Rodney Terry says that there is no timetable for his return. That is hope that they can get him back at some point this year. You're talking about 3 guys who not only from a defensive perspective are big. Devon Pryor, 6'7", 6'8", long, athletic. Kendall Weaver, we know what he does on the perimeter as a guard. Arthur Kaluma, really your main presence inside. But just from a depth perspective, this team is losing bodies. They are losing bodies seemingly by the day. The other 2 guys who were on that injury report, and Tremont Mark, I said Tremont Mark and Pryor. Pryor didn't play. Tremont Mark did play, but was not effective. And Alabama just shot the lights out, Chip. They shot over 60% in the first half. Continued every time Texas tried to trade shots with them, and that's what they couldn't do. Texas needed a stop. They couldn't get one. And Chip, I'll say this before I address some of the kind of side stories. That was the difference between a Missouri team that came in, had open looks, and couldn't make one, and allowed Texas to kind of hang around. They eventually won, versus this team. When those open looks hit those guys' hands, Jaron Stevenson and others, they knocked them down, right? That was the big difference. 17 made threes for Alabama. It's the 3rd most this year. That was the difference in the game. Quickly, some of the side stories. I noted this in a article last night. It's available up and now at Horns247.com. There was a vocal minority. I'd call it a smattering. It was not a majority. I want to emphasize this right now of whatever the crowd was. And it wasn't a physical sellout, but whatever the crowd was, I'd call it maybe, a couple dozen fans, but it was noticeable up to where the media sit, Chip. When Rodney Terry's name was announced during pregame introductions, there was a smattering of boos. And I didn't think that was called for. I think you can say whatever you want about the coaching performance that Rodney Terry has done. And I want to make this clear. I wrote this. If you buy a ticket, booing is well within the purview, Chip. I think it's well within the purview to boo. I just didn't think the boos were justified. I think if you hear from RT, someone takes a lot of pride. He's a Texan, takes a lot of pride in representing the University of Texas. I felt that juxtaposed to maybe some other people who have been on the sideline, or maybe not some, one specifically, who've been on the sideline for Texas at Moody Center. I think RT represents, the university class, and I didn't think that was warranted before the game. If you want to boo the team, Chip, at the performance, they're down, 17, 18, they were at half, well within bounds for me. But to boo RT, pre one dribble even being taken, I felt that was out of bounds. So
now the media section is near the visitors seating. You felt like these were Texas fans.
These were not coming. Yeah, that's an excellent call out, Chip. For those who don't know, the media section is smack dab in the middle of the visitor section. So you always hear the visiting fans much louder. That was not from the visiting section. I can tell you that right now. We all heard it. But yeah, it Chip and we'll get into it, right? With 7 games left, this team needs to find some wins, but it was not a great scene at Moody. Fans were leaving about the 7-8 minute mark. The chance of Alabama rang out, in the later stages of the game, and that's coming off of the team's last home game, in which chances of Pig Suey rang out, right? So, all in all, a tough stretch here for Texas basketball.
Yeah, Texas now 4-8 in SEC play, with 6 games to play, and that is going to be a tough climb. For sure. They've got Kentucky, then they're at South Carolina, at Arkansas, home against Georgia, at Mississippi State, and home against OU. So we'll size that up and take it or leave it. But Eric, I want to get back to some of the details. Arthur Kaluma, as you said, you were there during warm-up when he yelled out, and he only ended up playing 11 minutes with a knee injury. He had 0 points. He was 0 of 4 in those 11 minutes. Tremont Mark, who was the hero of the hit the game winner against A&M in the 22-point comeback, was only 2 of 12 shooting. Caden Shedrick, 3 of 10 shooting. And you got a strong performance from Jason Kent, which 6 of 9, 19 points. Texas doesn't know where their points are coming from night to night. They know Trey Johnson's going to get it done. He had 24 points, 9 of 17 shooting, 4 of 8 from 3. But the defense, Eric, Alabama shot 61.8%. They shot 58.6% from 3. And look, Alabama had 4 different players hit at least 3 threes. So at some point, you're like, well, if they can keep shooting those threes and making them, then we'll tip our cap to you. You kind of have to tip your cap to Alabama. And as you stated, some of Texas's best perimeter defenders were not available or were limited. Kendall Weaver, Tremont Mark.
Yeah, Chip. And to your point about the shot making, that's why I kind of lean back on that Missouri game again, because I think you saw the difference between a number 1, number 2 team in the nation versus the top 20-ish team that's, from night to night. But the point that I was shaking my head and agreeing with you with, Texas doesn't know where their points are coming from. And I've written this. I'll make the point here, Chip, because I'd love your thoughts. Listen, these players all knew what they were signing up for. Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope specifically. But they were number 1 scoring options where they came from, Chip. Tremont Mark was number 1 scoring option at Arkansas last year. Jordan Pope was the number 1 scoring option for his team at Oregon State. Jordan Pope came off the bench last night in favor of Julian Larry. That's the second time in Pope's career, he's ever come off the bench. The first was the first collegiate game of his career. So he's used to being a starter. He's used to being a volume scorer, right? And when I say volume scorer, he's going to get his shots up. That's what I mean by that. I think it's very difficult to ask those guys. And again, they knew what they were signing up for, Chip. But it's difficult to ask those guys, hey, go from being the first primary ball handler, scorer at your previous school to now, one night, we may need you to go off for 28 like Jordan Pope did at Oklahoma. Another night, we may need you just to, quote RT, get your butt down and play defense, right? Again, they're getting paid, to use the Rick Barnes line. That's what they're getting paid to do. We can't hide that fact. But I do think, Chip, there's a reason why Arthur Kaluma, in my mind, has been the best fit of the transfers. Even Julian Larry and Jason Kent were starters at Indiana State, right? Kaluma's never been the first scoring option on his team. When he was with Creighton, when he was with Kansas State, he was always the number 2 or number 3 guy, right? Number 3 last year at Kansas State as far as scoring option. So I think that's why he's fit in so well, because the adjustment for what he's being asked to do hasn't been as drastic. Chip, you can move on if you want, but just, if you do have a thought, because I think that's something to consider. And specificity with Pope and Mark, 2 guys who were 2 of the primary, guys available in the portal.
Yeah. It's going to be a really interesting stretch here for Texas basketball, because we know that fans are, as you pointed out, getting restless, and Rodney Terry was hired because he took Chris Beard's talent and was this close, a whisker away from going to the Final Four. And Texas Athletic Director Chris Del Conte, that was sort of a momentum hire rather than a hire that, if left to his own search, Chris Del Conte probably doesn't make. So very, very intriguing stretch of 6 games here. Let's flip it over to the Texas women, because they are in the most difficult week of their season, and they started it off with an impressive 66-62 victory over number 2 South Carolina on Sunday, ending South Carolina's 57-game winning streak in SEC play dating to the 21-22 season. And it was impressive. Vic Schaefer, who got a really nice first half performance from Taylor Jones, his 6'4" center, who had 11 points on 4 of 8 shooting, 6 rebounds and 4 steals. Vic Schaefer opts to go with his 6'6" junior transfer center, Kyla Oldacre, in the fourth quarter. And she scores 8 of her 13 in the fourth quarter. She had a block and a steal and just seemed to be in the middle of all the action, Eric. And this was it wasn't back and forth. South Carolina never led in this game, but they did make a run in the third quarter that made it about a 4-point game, kind of the whole fourth quarter. So this was, you were having to answer. In fact, Tessa Johnson of South Carolina was driving for a layup, and freshman Jordan Lee made a really good defensive play with Texas holding a 64-62 lead. And Madison Booker got the rebound. Rory Harmon ends up making the free throws for the 66-62 win. You and I were there. You wrote about it in your 4 Downs column today. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll take the 10,000 foot view, because I thought you did an excellent job breaking down the ins and outs of that game Sunday, post game and in the ensuing days. I'll take the 10,000 foot view first before kind of going back to some of the thoughts. I thought it was a great atmosphere for college basketball, Chip. It was great to, we park at the Manor Garage, and to see, 75, 80 minutes before tip off, fans spilling over into the street, and Robert Dedman. And quite frankly, I said this to, one of the other writers covering the men routinely. There hasn't been an atmosphere this year that rivaled that as far as on the men's side. And I tweeted it out. I wasn't here for the 22-23 campaign when Texas went to the Elite Eight, right? But in the 2 years I've covered Texas, I can think of maybe only one atmosphere. The game when Tyrese Hunter hit the buzzer beater over Baylor, that was kind of rivaled that atmosphere. Chip, it was great. You were there. I mean, it felt like college basketball. It felt like, you turn on Cameron Indoor Stadium or, Allen Fieldhouse or, the Carrier Dome, wherever you want to choose. Right. So
and it was impressive how many South Carolina fans were there.
They travel well. I mean, I guess when you win 2 out of the last 3 national titles, and side note, Chip, I'm just because you mentioned it, it is kind of cool to see how they've taken a Dawn Staley. Like, how many Philly Eagles shirts did you see in the stands, right? I mean, forgive me, I don't think there are that many Eagle fans in Columbia, South Carolina, right? So they're showing, support for their head coach, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it was a great atmosphere for college basketball. It was noted. I mean, first off, to do that on Super Bowl Sunday, right? It'd kind of be that lead in. That was great. It was noted yesterday that was the most watched college women's game this year, north of 1.2 million viewers. So from a 10,000 foot view, it was great. And like I said, did an excellent job talking about the game itself. I thought Taylor Jones definitely stood out to me in the early part of that game. Because remember, Texas got bullied. And granted, they missed plenty of second chances and third chances and fourth chances in the first meeting in Columbia, but they also got bullied, right? Two things can be true. And to see them respond, my major takeaway from the game, Chip, is I'd love to see this one on a neutral floor because, okay, Texas defended their home court. The Gamecocks defended their home court. I'd love to roll this one out and play it in Huntsville, I believe is where the women's tournament is, Huntsville, Alabama. I'd love to see them, roll it out there and play on a neutral floor and see what happens. Because I think these are two really great teams, Chip.
Yeah. It does not get easier for the Texas women. They've got, they're playing another top 10 matchup Thursday at Kentucky. Kentucky is playing some great basketball this year. People don't really associate Kentucky with women's basketball, but that is happening. The Kentucky women are 19-2. They also only have one loss in SEC play. And then Texas comes home and plays LSU, who's number 5. So you're going to play number 2, number 8, and number 5 in 8 days. Eric, that's a lot. And so we'll see how they can manage and remember they've been without Aaliyah Moore.
Yeah.
The starting power forward. I asked Vic after the game, are you expecting to get her back before the end of the regular season? He said, we just don't know at this point. So they've been starting Jakalenga Mwenentanda, the 6'2", junior with really good length, and she's played well, but she's a different player than Aaliyah Moore. Aaliyah Moore she's gonna, get physical down low. Jakalenga Mwenentanda is going to be more athletic. She's super long, as we mentioned, but yeah, so they've got to navigate that. And of course, I reported late last week that Layla Filia, their 17-point average per game senior guard from Michigan, is going to seek a medical red shirt this season because she needs eye surgery for a detached retina. And they were certainly expecting her to step in for Shaylee Gonzalez. Layla Filia, a veteran, has a good feel for when to take a three, when to drive it. Super free throw shooter, got to the line 161 times last year, whereas Shaylee Gonzalez only got to the line 28 times last year. And Texas is not, they're one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the SEC, but they also have Taylor Jones and Kyla Oldacre, and they pounded it inside against South Carolina, and that's what got it done. So really fun team to watch and cheer for, and we'll see how they handle the rest of this week, because this is the toughest week of their season. That Kentucky game is a classic trap game, if you will. You're playing South Carolina at home. You got to go on the road to a top 10 matchup and then come home and play their good old friend Kim Mulkey and LSU. You mentioned the Eagles in the Super Bowl, Eric, before we touch on baseball and softball. I meant to mention this in the first block. Xavier Worthy becomes the first Longhorn to ever score a touchdown in a Super Bowl. I think people were kind of, their jaw dropped. They're like, what? Surely a Longhorn has scored a touchdown in a Super Bowl in all these years. No. Texas and Alabama both broke that string in Super Bowl 59. Devontae Smith catching a touchdown pass for the Eagles. First Alabama player to score a touchdown in a in a Super Bowl. Yeah, Joe Namath led the Jets to the win in Super Bowl III, but he didn't score. So Xavier Worthy ends up as the lone bright spot for the Chiefs. 8 catches, 157 yards, 2 touchdowns. And the Chiefs didn't even cross midfield until the third quarter. That was just a wipeout by the Eagles, but kudos to Xavier Worthy, Eric.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I think the Alabama one surprised me a little bit more. I don't know why. I guess I'm just thinking off the top of my head, notable Longhorns, at least in my lifetime. Roy Williams, Vince Young, Ricky Williams, David Thomas. I'm just thinking about offensive guys that would have Cedric Benson, RIP. Jamal. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, not many made Super Bowls. And that's why I think I was more surprised, because the Alabama one, you obviously think Joe Namath in the legendary, Super Bowl, like, oh, he didn't score, because that's the first place my mind went there. Great performance for Xavier Worthy to kind of, nice springboard into his sophomore campaign in the NFL. And Chip, I want to clean up one thing. I said I was looking forward to seeing Texas and South Carolina on neutral floor, and that could possibly be in the SEC tournament. Well, the SEC tournament's in Greenville, South Carolina, so it won't be there either. I had a flashback to my Conference USA days. The tournament there is in Huntsville, Alabama. So if they're going to play on a neutral floor, it's going to be in the NCAA tournament. It's not going to be in the SEC tournament yet.
Yeah. Well, Eric, let's touch on Texas baseball. They will open the season against Louisville at the Shriners College Classic in Arlington Globe Life Field. You had a chance to talk to Jim Schlossnagle and some players yesterday. Your thoughts on these Longhorns as they head into their season opener on Friday?
This ain't no rebuild. Jim Schlossnagle is not here for your wait and see, and we're going to, fill things out. Jim Schlossnagle is here to win. He is here to win now. He's here to win immediately. You were around him a couple of weeks ago when he had his availability, and then nothing has changed. The intensity from Jim Schlossnagle, you feel it when you deal with the guy. He talked about it. He doesn't have any hobbies, right? He wants to be at the ballpark. I think that's very clear. It's palpable when you talk to Jim Schlossnagle. What stood out to me, Chip, and we talked with 7 players, and I wrote this yesterday. They talked about the mental approach to baseball, right, that Jim Schlossnagle really emphasizes. And he brought in a guy, David Kane, who is a mental performance coach, mental strength coach. I think that's the title he gives himself. But he's worked with Schloss in the past, worked with him at TCU and his teams there. Of course, those TCU teams went to, if memory serves me correct, 4 straight College World Series appearances there in Fort Worth. So clearly something he believes in. The players echoed it, Chip. They talked about, and it's something I think it goes a little bit under the radar with baseball. You better get used to failure. If you get 3 out of 10, that's a successful day, right? And I believe it was Jared Thomas, if memory serves me correct, the pitcher, who was saying, if you go 3 out of 10, for at Moody Center, you're coming to the bench. You go 3 out of 10, at DKR, you're not suiting up, right? So clearly for them, the mental aspect that Schlossnagle emphasized, and Chip, this quote stood out to me. He said, "We've spent more money, time, and resources than anyone in the nation working the mental aspect of the game, going back to his time at TCU and A&M and now here." So from a mental perspective, I think these guys are ready. And like I said, the other takeaway, it's not a rebuild, folks. If you want to hold Jim Schlossnagle to a standard of, hey, Omaha or bust, it is fair, because he's making it clear that is his standard.
Yeah. He inherits some talented players, obviously Kimball Schuessler, Jalen Flores, Max Ballou, and then they supplemented with the portal, and obviously a lot of focus is going to be on the left-hander from Indiana State, who transferred in, Jared Spencer. who looks like he'll be the Friday night starter against Louisville. Eric, the number 1 ranked Texas softball team, I'll touch on them real quickly. They did a kind of a crazy 6 games in 3 days in 3 cities. They started off in Louisiana, and then they went over to Beaumont, and then they finished up in Huntsville. And I would say that they went 6-0. You know, they beat Louisiana, which is a team that beat OU last year. That's a good win. The others, you know, came against Longwood, and St. John's, and Lamar, Tulsa, and Sam Houston. But I would say the takeaway really for me, I mean, you had solid performances from, you know, Tegan Cavan and Mac Morgan, the returning arms. Texas returns 86% of their pitching stats or totals from a year ago. But Cambria Salmon, the super talented right-handed freshman pitcher, made 3 appearances, including 2 starts, and she gave up 1 run on a home run, and you know, went 5 innings in her 2 starts. She pitched 1 inning of scoreless relief in the win over Longwood, but she looks like she is comfortable. And so in 11 innings pitched, she gave up 4 hits, 1 run, with 13 strikeouts, and has now a 2-0 record with a .64 ERA. Obviously, the competition will increase. We know that, but Texas starts off 6-0, and then they'll host Maryland in the Bevo Classic on Friday at 4:00, and then play Texas Tech at 6:30 on Friday. So a doubleheader on Friday. And remember, Texas Tech signed Stanford pitcher Nigeri Kennedy to $1 million NIL deal, $500,000 for each of her last 2 seasons. Texas has beaten Nigeri Kennedy. They beat her last year. So we'll have that to look forward to on Friday. Eric, you ready for some take it or leave it?
Chip, it's America, or at least Central Texas's favorite game. Take it or leave it, Chip. I am ready.
Let's do it. All right. And I am serving first. Is that right?
No, I am serving to you.
You are serving first.
The most important position battle of spring football will be at cornerback, replacing Jahdae Barron. Take it or leave it, Chip.
You know what? I'm going to take this, Eric, because I think because there's so many guys who are in the mix for this. That's what makes it intriguing to me. You've got Kobe Black, who got good reps last year as a true freshman. You got Warren Roberson, who has been a special teamer for Texas, who I really have liked his confidence, the confidence that he plays with. You've got Santana Wilson working at corner, Wardell Mack, who had the best interception, that layout interception in the opener against Colorado State. And then you bring in Cade Phillips, who I'm so excited to get a look at on the field because of his length. Our man, Hank South, talked about the fact that he has, he's 6'1", but he has the wingspan of someone who's 6'7". So we know Texas values length. And so Cade Phillips is a guy I'm really intrigued to see. But you've also got a couple of other freshmen, Grayson Littleton from Tampa.
Wiregrass Ranch, played for
Wiregrass Ranch.
Played for my old high school coach, Mark Canner. There you go.
Okay. So I'm sure you know all about Grayson Littleton. And then you got Caleb Chester from Fort Bend Marshall. All those guys are going to be competing. And who knows? Could they move Jalen Gilbo over to take a look if they feel like Jelani McDonald is good enough where they need him on the field with Michael Taff and Derek Williams as the likely starters at safety? I just think that's a really intriguing position battle, Eric. So I'm going to take it. What say you?
Chip, I will take it. I thought you did a great job kind of covering, the name to know. So I'll make it quick as far as my reasoning. I'm going to take it. I do think the position battle, we kind of touched on this in the previous roundtable, that most intrigues me is backup quarterback. But I think that will be settled in the fall. I think in the spring, as you're trying to get, backup quarterback is right. That's the break glass in case of emergency. It's a knock on wood, right? Yes, Texas quarterbacks have been banged up in recent history, but we're not talking about a starting position, someone who was so crucial to the defense like Jahdae Barrett. I think that's something that has to be addressed in the spring. So for that reasoning, I will take it with the emphasis being spring football, not fall.
Okay. All right. Take it or leave it. Number 2. At 4-8 in SEC play, Texas men's basketball has to win at least 4 of its last 6 regular season games to get into the NCAA tournament, Eric. Take it or leave it.
Strong take, Chip. I was joking with some of the other writers yesterday because, we've heard so much about the SEC being the strongest baseball. It's the strongest everything league, but if we're talking about basketball here, the strongest basketball league, that 4-14 should get you in, right? If it's that tough, 4-14 should get you in the tournament. No, I don't think. I think 7 puts you squarely on the bubble. I think 8 gets you in, and I think 8. That's even questionable for some people.
8 wins, 8 and 10,
8 and 10, 8 wins in SEC play. 8 and 10 gets you in. I think that's even questionable for some people because of how, let's just call a spade, Chip, how weak Texas's non-conference schedule was. They didn't win in non-conference outside of NC State. They didn't really, win in non-conference their opportunities with UConn and Ohio State. But I still think if they get to 8 and 10, that gets them in, Chip.
Yeah. I'm going to take this as well. And this is, just to recap, Texas is going to play Kentucky at home on Saturday at 7:00 at Moody Center. That game's going to be on ESPN. And then they're at South Carolina, at Arkansas, home against Georgia, at Mississippi State, home against Oklahoma. Man, a win against Kentucky and the ability to get to 8 and 10 in league play. This game against Kentucky almost feels like a must win as part of that equation, Eric, because you got to win at home and you got to take care of business against the good teams that come in. Those are great opportunities for you. So let's see if Texas can handle that. But I too will take this. All right. Take it or leave it, number 3.
Take it or leave it, number 3. First off, Chip, when Chip Brown, you have your house, you don't have to worry about the fire alarm inspectors coming in. Want to make sure you're okay. I thought it was regular apartment maintenance, but it's the folks who make sure the fire alarms go off. So I had to let them in.
Absolutely.
Take it or leave it, number 3. The number 3 Texas women go undefeated this week at number 8 Kentucky and number 5 LSU. Take it or leave it, Chip.
You know what? I think it's a lot to ask. So I'm going to leave this. If they go to Kentucky and win, because I do think they'll handle their business against LSU at home, but I could see them dropping one of those 2 games, having just beaten number 2 South Carolina at home in an incredible game that we talked about earlier. You've got Kentucky the Kentucky women coming off a loss at Ole Miss. Now, Texas went to Ole Miss and won. So I just look, if Texas goes undefeated, the Texas women go undefeated this week, get excited, folks, because that will send a message to the rest of the college basketball world that with or without Aaliyah Moore, with or without Layla Filia, this Texas women's basketball team has enough maybe to win it all. So I'm going to leave this, though, Eric, because I think it's a lot to ask to win 3 top 10 games in essentially a week. What say you?
Chip, like you, if they win these 3 games, I think they make a strong argument. Also, it depends on what happens with UCLA, USC, right? As far as being the number 1 team in the nation, in my mind. Of course, UCLA holds that distinction now. They'll face number 6 USC. So, who knows? They could fall, and the Trojans would have a right for that as well. But, Chip, I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to take it. I think if this were last year, I think it would be a little fair to kind of couch the expectations as, we'll see, they're growing. They've got all the pieces, right? Outside of Layla Filia, as you mentioned, who's out with the eye surgery, or going to need an additional eye surgery, I should say. But no, they have all the pieces. It'd be great if they had Aaliyah Moore. But I think from a perspective of if Texas is going to truly be a national title contender, go out and make a statement. If they can do that, you have all the reason in the world to believe that Vic Schaefer's club are, quite frankly, favorites to take home a national title. So I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to take it, Chip.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll say Jordan Lee becomes a really central figure for Texas in this stretch, because the freshman is capable of going off from 3-point range. She's a 3-level scorer, but she's a freshman. We'll see how she handles it. Madison Booker is obviously the focal point of everybody's defense. South Carolina face guarded her with Bree Hall, a 6-foot long guard who is an excellent defender, and made it tough for Madison Booker. But again, Texas had enough inside with Taylor Jones and Kyla Oldacre to finish off that win. Played great defense. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Flagship Podcast. We hope you have a great Valentine's week. Lots going on. Lots for us to recap when we join up with you again next week. Of course, Texas baseball, Texas softball, basketball. We should have a schedule for Texas spring football, which, as I mentioned last week in our pod, Texas is toying with a new format for Texas spring football. There is a lot of consternation over whether there should be a spring game internally. So we might get some form of spring game. I think if Steve Sarkisian had it, if it was left up to him, he'd probably skip a spring game because, as we mentioned last week, his team just played 16 games and he'd prefer a more of an OTA NFL type schedule. But we'll be back to talk about all of it. Make sure you like and subscribe, please. Probably should have said that at the beginning. That's how we grow. We appreciate that. Tell your friends and enemies to like and subscribe to the Horns247 YouTube channel, and feel free to leave us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to us as a podcast. That also helps us grow. And until next time, we'll see you over at Horns247.com. For Eric Henry, I am Chip Brown. Stay safe and keep the faith.